Can I just quickly ask a question which I stuck up, which I was really intrigued by? So how does the infrastructure sector empower, I say a pioneer, but pioneers who will step outside of the pack or the current pack behavior of the sector around how things are done?
I think it takes a brave client to begin with, and probably a client in the private sector. I mean, I don't know, some of you guys probably know Miles Shelley from Robert McAlpine. And one of the things, you know, just talking to him on the whole various things about Robert McAlpine, but just, he said one of the best jobs he ever worked on was the Emirates Stadium, because basically the client was an intelligent client. The money in the job was, you know, in inverted commas, comfortable. There was trust, i.e., you know, Robert McAlpine would do a favor for Arsenal. Arsenal would do a favor back over here for Robert McAlpine. And so, you know, the job was kind of comfortable. So, I mean, Jeremy and Tony, Chris, you guys will know, but to him, that was a good job because it was comfortable. They could be innovative. They could try things. They knew Arsenal weren't going to kind of like hold them to rights. Obviously, they would have done if it had gone badly wrong, but it was just a comfortable project.
Unlike Spurs, my team, when they built their team. But there's another story.
Yes,
firstly, before we move into the next phase, was everyone comfortable with that? Thank you so much. We thought that was a great hour. Is everyone happy and comfortable with what we discussed in that time?
Yeah, good for me.
Yeah, that's good, thanks.
Thank you.
Comfortable is not where I would immediately.
I've had some great feedback from some of the people that attended through myself.
Good. Well, that's excellent. So what we thought we'd do, because this half hour will fly as well, there's a couple of questions here which I think are really worth picking up on. Liz Robinson, who is the Highways England key account manager for Skanska, has asked a question. Do you think government and clients and supply chain will remove constraints and barriers to enable faster construction post-COVID? A typical highway construction scheme takes 11 years from inception to completion, all paid for by the taxpayer, which is grossly inefficient. What comments, Chris? You're smiling at that one, so.
I think they did. I mean, you look at the Nightingale example, you know, that they lifted loads of different things, the procurement restrictions, but I think a lot of them, I think it needs really well to be thought through, because I fear a lot of them will return unless we do something different. I mean, I think it's a question of look at the good projects and look at what they did, and don't just automatically default back to long drawn out procurement process and long drawn out development process.
Don't you think we, to some extent, you know, we're constrained by procurement rules, etc., etc.? I mean, I'm not a great Brexiteer at all, but my God, the EU procurement regime is kind of hell. I mean, the trouble is there needs to be a procurement room, because, you know, there shouldn't be all this hugger-mugger smoky rooms, etc., etc. But they sort of seem to drive so much awful behavior, whatever an over-formalized procurement regime. And, you know, when you think about, okay, I've got my arm needs my hamstring needs operating on, to take my youngest son's example. I didn't kind of like try and find the cheapest doctor to check him out. You know, you found the guy who treats the GB athletic, you know.
Tony, I'm interested in whether IPA are looking at this, because IPA, we were due to have a meeting with the Cabinet Office just before COVID broke, where they're rewriting they're rewriting, as you guys will know, I'm sure, rewriting the playbook of procurement. And the issue that they want to look at, which is stuff that we focus on, is relationship rather than simply governance and process. The two sides, the governance process, critical, of course, but to enable relationship where you can actually do things better. And that's, well, they felt, and I wonder whether you feel that's something that they might now, I mean, Tony, I wonder what your thoughts are on that, because you come from that.
Before you answer that, Tony, if I can add briefly to that, it was not just the relationship, it was the behaviours in the process that we're in, because we can all like each other, and that doesn't make any difference. It's how the behaviours flow from that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I'm a huge believer in. I mean, one of the first things we did in Crossrail when I arrived there was actually to sit down with our suppliers. It hasn't all been plain sailing, I'll promise you that, but at least we know each other really, really well now, and we talk a lot, and we're in a completely different place. The problem in the government, to start with the problem, is that the government side is not, you know, with no disrespect, sophisticated enough to deal with advanced procurement methods, if you like. It's a hugely asymmetric relationship in my experience. Even though the government has significantly upskilled its commercial arm, at the end of the day, there are no rewards. Well, first of all, the players, the procurement sort of players on the government side lack the experience and the confidence to do innovative things. And secondly, you know, even if they try, they're not rewarded, and that's why, that's why it requires really significant mind changes. I mean, significant changes in mental, in attitude, right at the very top, which is to say, it is okay to change the risk relationship. It is okay for people to be more experimental. Let me give you an example. You know, one example. You know, we wanted to build 6 prisons using modern methods of construction. So we had, in government, with partners, obviously private, designed an entire system to allow really innovative, modular, factory-based construction of really fantastic set of prisons. This would have been a first for government, you know, to look at this whole set of projects as a kind of opportunity to create something new. A, it was too new for people to really deal with. B, you know, 6 prisons became 2 prisons, 2 prisons became 1 prison because of budgetary constraints, and all the work went in the trash can. That's just an example of, there's a lot of people trying to do the right thing, but the overall environment is challenging. Maybe COVID will make people think differently. You know.
I mean, what do you think about the delivery authority, Jeremy, and the whole Olympics thing? I mean,
well, maybe I could start with an example of a prison for Tony. Let's just keep that going for a minute. Mm-hmm. I've just finished building a prison in New South Wales, and it's at a place called Grafton. It's near Coffs Harbour. And they said, well, we can't afford a prison. So what we did was we created a business plan, and we showed the client that if they gave us all their old prisons, we could use the profit from refurbishing those and converting them all to housing to finance and build a new prison for 1,500 people. And we've literally just opened it. This is John Lang. And that's 400 women, 400 high-risk males, the balance sort of 400, 700 or whatever it is, low-risk males. But we haven't just built a prison, because we redefined what success was for the community and for the New South Wales government. And so added to that, we've created a whole lot of industrial units so that if Tony's been a bad boy and he goes into prison, he comes out of that with a job and a skill set. So you may get your 5 years in prison, but bad luck, you've got to work and be trained as a plasterer while you're there and you come out. So the whole of life cost to the New South Wales government was 0. And we've switched the measure of success from, you know, locking people up for whatever period of time into rehabilitation. And going on that journey was actually a very difficult thing to do, to convince the politicians and the civil service procurement people.
I love that example. Can I just? I want to ask you all a couple of questions a moment about trust, if I may, and capture your answers. But I just want to come back.
That was about trust as well. Can it be done? Yeah, okay, we'll trust you. Let's have a go.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's fast. But you know, we were talking before about at the point that Nick was making about the cathedral, which is about higher purpose, and redefining the purpose, because you can have an open conversation about what could really be possible here, and secondly, redefining the risks involved. Seems to me to be critical to that story too. You know, in other words, the risk and opportunities are flip sides of each other, and you've suddenly created a new opportunity which creates different definition of what the risks are involved. Do you agree?
You have to get people away, Stuart, from looking at timescales. I mean, the timescale for a politician is a couple of years until he gets re-elected.
Right.
You know, when we started the Olympics, and you know, I can remember having my early discussions with John Kingman in Treasury and Tessa Jowell and many others. It was, what's London going to look like in 2020? Here we are in 2020. And I got all sorts of stories about what was the state of Stratford and how there was a grand plan for redeveloping it. And a lot of evidence about the deterioration of health. You know, as you go one station eastwards on the Jubilee line, life expectancy drops a year, etc. So if you look at what is there today in 2020 versus what was there back in 2007 when all this whole thing started, it's like chalk and cheese. But I'm not being rude, but ordinary people can't see the total vision, and you have to try and convert people to think about a 20-year time frame, not just a 2-year time frame of getting an Olympic stadium built.
Yeah, let me, if I may.
A lot of the relationship.
Sorry,
you mentioned about trust. I
Yeah.
think this government to private sector, the sort of civil service belief that the private sector's bad, that it's properly optimized, and that they're looking after the interests, and therefore they need to control the procurement to prevent the private sector. And then that then creates these reinforced procurement. Actually, there's something about clear, purposeful companies that have a long-term objective and are valued. It's interesting. The valuation of companies now is not really just based on the profit they make today. It's based on their long-term. It's a bit like, the Buffett quote that, the stock market in the short term's a voting machine and the long term's a weighing machine. They are interested in long-term purpose. So how can you get that trust to work in government in a relationship that currently doesn't, and therefore is dragged through these drawn-out procurement things and starts with some very different beliefs that actually need to be unpicked?
What's your answer to that question, Chris? If you had to answer that question you've just posed, what would be your answer?
I think there's something about starting with the fundamental belief of what you're trying to achieve, and not starting with a procurement process that we've run time and time again that is founded on a belief of competition and profit elimination.
Thank you.
I just want to build on that and what Jeremy said. The redefinition of purpose. I think this is fantastically important. What he described is the ultimate goal, the ultimate society goal of doing all of this stuff to make sure that the prisoners were incarcerated, but actually came out as valuable members of society. I mean, that is a real purpose. Building a new prison is not a real purpose. And I think this is fantastically important. HS2 has suffered. I still support it, by the way, but it has suffered from a very weak definition of purpose. Getting to Birmingham 3 seconds earlier or whatever, driven by some ludicrous kind of business, treasury-driven sort of stupid-ass sort of evaluation methodology. And really kind of getting to core purpose, and even how somebody said it earlier, measure the success of infrastructure development. Crossrail has led to the development of 90,000 new homes across London. a lot of which are social homes. But what is the purpose of Crossrail? Actually, the purpose is our objective is to run a railway. It actually was for a long time conceived of as just a very big construction project. All of our problems today in Crossrail, not all of them, but 90% of them are to do with the fact that it was conceived as a construction project rather than a massive systems integration project. I'm sorry, I'm now getting into kind of rambling territory. But
don't you think another interesting thing, Tony and co, is the fact, yeah, we've had COVID, but we've also got this realignment in, well, I'm talking UK terms, in UK politics, where, before COVID, Boris Johnson and co were talking about levelling up. And there is I don't know if that, there's a dire electoral need to invest in the north of England and the places in England that aren't the southeast, and to do it within a political time frame so someone can claim the benefit for it. That ought to drive new, faster procurement, investment, getting your investment in the ground methodologies. So COVID, not leveling up, blah, blah, blah.
Coming back to our core question, I love, and by the way, we're recording. I just want to remind, and we won't use anything without sharing with you, but we'd love to get some thoughts from you to share. It seems to me there are three things that you're talking about that are changing. One is, if we can always have a very high sense of purpose, that changes everything. So Nightingale Hospital, the Olympics, the New South Wales prison, once you change the definition of the purpose, everything changes behind it, amazingly. It changes everything. And that would be an amazing way to start with every project, even if it's just a B road on a site, in the middle of nowhere. The second thing that you just talked about there, Nick, is the political imperative to demonstrate change. And the third thing is that we've seen, one thing COVID has done, is we've seen the capability of doing things, of short-circuiting everything and do things quickly when we need to. So there's new possibilities are there before our very eyes. So I'd love to just go around you all and get your thoughts on those things and how they apply in this new world, if I may. I don't want to kind of answer the question, I want to kind of paint a picture. So Nick, you were writing stuff down. If I can start with you, what your thoughts post-COVID then? What do you think has changed, and particularly how does trust play into that?
Well, I think that the impossible has happened, and we've procured Nightingale hospitals, and we can delivered. It's almost been like wartime. It delivered a fast rollout of testing and all that sort of stuff. So it shows that what had previously been thought, oh, we can't do, we can do, subject to EU procurement rules. So I do think that fundamental has changed, and I think people shouldn't lose that, and hopefully we won't lose it, and hopefully someone is capturing these lessons learned, because listening to Jeremy describe the New South Wales prisons experience, I mean, nothing can be more powerful to a politician, because ultimately infrastructure is political. Nothing can be as powerful to a politician as showing them this works, this has happened, this is how we can do it here. So I don't know if that answered your question, Stuart, sorry.
It's great thoughts. Who'd like to come in next on that kind of what's changed and what will change? Jeremy.
I think what will change is politicians' leadership. I'll start again. What will change is leadership of all entities, politics, business, society, asking themselves different questions now and reprioritizing what's actually important to us. Here's a simple example. So the Secretary of State for Defense, is he going to go and spend 40 billion on some new nuclear submarines, where actually if you want to do more damage to people, you just need a 10-pound file of COVID virus and just sprinkle
COVID 2020
anywhere in the world. So here it says 2020. So with 2020 hindsight, how are we going to run ourselves in the future, whether it's defense, infrastructure, society, or whatever. And I think it will change. And it will change very fast. It needs to happen fast because, I mean, my wife's been in the medical business for 40 years. She's been wagging her finger at me saying, actually, we're just going to have to learn to live with it.
Can you just say something about the change in behaviours? So there may be a change in, as it were, the framing and the objectives and the decisions we make. That's a big, but in terms of the behaviour, the way we do things, which is where we came in the way we do things in the context of infrastructure, what will happen?
A lot more openness, better communicate early, honestly, completely. We're sort of seeing that with the daily briefings out of number 10, how to earn trust, honour the agreements and keep promises. I think all of this sort of generation of trust thing is very important. You know, don't forever be undermining individuals, whether they're fellows in the same business or fellow politicians or whatever, working jointly to resolve disagreements, setting something up for success rather than sitting on the sidelines and sniping about failure. I mean, in the civil service, when I went in, I can remember going in, you know, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was, and I quickly learned that fear of failure is much stronger than the desire for success, you know. The last thing anybody wanted to do was make a bloody decision. No, let's keep my head down, out of the way. I don't want to decide. Or I said to you, just bring me another rock. You know, I need more information before I can make a decision. Anyway, don't start me. I'll be here for an hour.
It's so good to hear you.
Tony, do you want to come in?
Well, I just wanted to say, I think one of the things that I think on this matter of purpose, there is something that is indefinable. I don't want to be too Pollyanna-ish about this, but there's something indefinable going on in the public psyche. Events like this change your view of life. Indefinably, the world becomes much more uncertain in some way, a little bit more scary for people. One sort of looks a bit more for fundamental values and so on. One of the things I don't think we've talked about is the sort of leveling up. It was mentioned. But I think when the analysis is done, it will be very clear that the people who've suffered most here have been the most disadvantaged. And, you know, I don't know what the consequences of that will be. They may be, they may not, but they could be profound. One of the very few, if you go back over 5,000 years of history, there are very few ways in which inequality has ever been reduced. One is a world war. World War I and World War II were great for reducing inequality. One is a sort of Soviet system, but that didn't last very well. The third is a plague. The plague was really, really good for agricultural workers in the Middle Ages. The 50% that lived earned twice as much money after the plague, the Black Death. So, you know, this might be a really big change in terms of equality. No, it might just not, because after all, look who's in power. But nevertheless, that may change too.
So can I?
But Tony, don't you think the good thing about who's in power is, you know, I'm not Tory or anything particularly, but the guy's future is in the hands of all these guys in the north that have voted them in.
Yeah. No, I understand.
Here's a question for me. Given the point you've made about Nightingale, putting aside the EC regulations, which we could change from January next year, after all, why would the government ever want to go back to procuring the way it did? And secondly, why would society now not expect that we can deliver these projects at speed?
Look, in the Nightingale example, I mean, one thing that they had to do there, for example, was put an oxygen main around the building. Now, I can't imagine, I mean, Jeremy probably knows really practically how long it would take to engineer, design, and get safety approval for something like that in the normal world. bloody years, I would expect. I don't know. They did it in a couple of days. I mean, this is, you know, quite flammable stuff and so on. The question, I think, is that, you know, that is because people have a very different risk appetite, because necessity is the mother of invention and people's lives are at risk. Are we going to revert to so it's not just about procurement, Kevin, is my point. It is about all of the health and safety and other things that we have come to expect. The reason that Crossrail is taking so long is that we're spending a year putting the documentation together to get health and safety approved.
So compliance, basically.
Compliance, for sure.
Does that change in any
There's
way?
anything wrong with that, but it's massive now. It's massive.
It should.
We're spending months trying to resolve a problem to allow certain disadvantaged people to be able to open doors in stations that are fireproofed, and yeah, I could go on, and I don't want to sound like an old Tory, but it's that attitude to risk, not just the procurement issue, that would need to change.
Can I just share with you? We very connected with a guy called Richard Anderson, who's the former chairman and chief exec of the Institute of Risk Management, and he has a really interesting approach to this, which actually we discussed last week, which is he says that the focus on small risks therefore create much greater systemic risk, and we've seen this happen. Boy, have we seen this happen! Mm. And it really and so therefore. But no one's thinking about the big risk because they're all accountable. Their arse is kicked on the small risk. Mm. And the interesting thing for me is how this utterly aligns with this discussion we just had about higher purpose. In other words, big picture thinking, which actually is, in our way we look at it, is ecosystem thinking rather than trading thinking, you know, in a trading relationship between two parties. Then no one's thinking of the big picture. But this big picture thinking applies to risk, it applies to opportunity, it applies to purpose. And if you can get to that level in what you're doing, then as we've heard, a lot of these other challenges, they don't go away, but they diminish or get tackled more quickly because there is this bigger sense of both opportunity and risk, rather than a focus on the very smaller risk of you might be ripping me off, you're protecting your shareholders. If I don't pin you down.
The issue, what it comes down to as well is, okay, there's a higher purpose. Who defines the higher purpose? Is it Adolf Hitler? Or is it someone or is it a sane person? And who says that person is sane? You know, we live in a democracy, and fortunately, it requires buy-in from God knows how many different constituencies before the higher purpose can be defined. It's not the Archbishop of Canterbury saying, this is the higher purpose, build me a cathedral anymore.
But look, Nick, if I may, I mean, I mentioned this earlier. If we redefine Crossrail sorry to bore on about Crossrail, as something that is required to provide more safe transportation for Londoners now, because of the massive restrictions caused by social distancing, that redefinition of purpose actually can produce a tremendously different outcome. We could have a safe railway operating much more quickly, but trust would be involved, engineering judgment would be involved, rather than 35 weeks of paperwork and going through assurance processes and regulatory regimes. So it would require judgment, it would require trust, and it would require the sense that actually people's lives will be saved, will be protected if this railway comes on earlier. Of course, it'll be a risk. Of course, it would take a reliable.
Yeah. And I totally with you, Tony. And ultimately, it will take a brave politician or two to buy into all that.